So let's talk about the brand new iPad Pro 2020 edition. Now, I already did a full review on my YouTube channel of both the iPad Pro and the brand new Magic Keyboard, but I really wanted to go in depth with this product because honestly, I don't think I really talked about everything that I actually initially wanted to talk about when it comes to this product alone. Now, keep in mind, I don't currently own this product anymore. At least at the time of this recording, I did own this product. I actually got a review unit sent out to me for the iPad Pro and the Magic Keyboard. So I'm going to be talking a lot in this episode about the iPad Pro and the brand new Magic Keyboard. And then sometime in this video, I'm going to try to answer the question, can this actually replace a modern day laptop or desktop, basically a traditional computer, because I think I have a lot to say when it comes to that specifically. So without further ado, let's start this video. First off, of course, we're going to start with the iPad Pro. What can I say about the iPad Pro that hasn't already been said? It's an amazing product for what it is. The build quality is amazing. The functionality is amazing. Overall, it is an amazing product from Apple. Honestly, I still think to date, this is my favorite product from Apple, period. I just love everything about it. Something is just magical about using an iPad without any bezels, just a modern design. Overall, I'm really a big fan of the iPad Pro. You may also be wondering which iPad Pro did I get out for review. I actually got the iPad Pro 12.9 inch to actually use. I didn't really have a choice whether I got the 11 inch or the 12.9 inch version for a review unit, and I did get, again, the 12.9 inch version of this product. And honestly, I can't really say anything bad about this product. If you are concerned about the 12.9 inch version maybe being slightly too big, I don't think honestly you'll have anything to worry about when it comes to the size of the 12.9 inch version, just because when I first unboxed this product, since I did get a brand new review unit brand new out of the box, what I can say is I was actually kind of worried it may be a little bit too big and maybe a little bit too unwieldy to actually use. But lo and behold, when I actually got this thing unboxed and I picked it up, I was actually pretty shocked by how light and how thin this thing was. I think this thing only weighs a little bit over 1 pound, and it's really thin as well. With it being thin and with it being very lightweight, you won't really notice the heaviness of this thing. What I will say though is just keep in mind the 12.9 inch version of the iPad Pro, you will actually need two hands to actually use this thing. You could use it in one hand, but your hand's going to get super tired after a while. So I would really recommend holding it in two hands, to be honest, and that's primarily what I did. Honestly, with this product, I would honestly really recommend some type of stand with this thing, because it is kind of hard to hold this for long periods of time at 12.9 inches, but again, I'm just so surprised and so shocked by it wasn't as unwieldy as I first initially thought it was. So I think if you're skeptical or you're wondering about should you buy this over the 11 inch, I would definitely pull the trigger, because obviously there are going to be some benefits with the 12.9 inch version compared to the 11 inch. Of course, obviously the screen size is going to be bigger, so that means if you do a lot of things like maybe doing multimedia, like watching videos, browsing the internet, whatever you're doing, you're just going to get a bigger screen, especially if you're a person that does a lot of split view applications where you have two applications open side by side. I really do think that's where the 12.9 inch version really beats the 11 inch version. Another thing that's actually going to be better on the 12.9 inch version is going to be drawing, just because you will obviously have a bigger canvas to work with when it comes to drawing with the Apple Pencil. Speaking really quickly of the Apple Pencil, I can't really say anything about the Apple Pencil since I never really got it for review, unfortunately, and I never used an Apple Pencil, so there's that. Speaking on this whole topic about the iPad Pro, one thing I do want to comment on, and there is two features that I don't think nobody talks about when it comes to the iPad Pro specifically. One is when I first got the iPad Pro, for some reason, a couple of days after I got it, I was like, let me go ahead and turn off my iPad Pro because I was going to be on a trip or something, and I wanted to save battery for quite a long time since I wasn't going to be using it. So basically what I ended up doing is I tried holding down the power button like you would normally do on a lot of Apple devices, and when I held the power button down, I was like, why can't you actually turn off the iPad Pro? Why isn't it letting me slide to power down? And basically what happened is I found out on the iPad Pro specifically, I think it's the only iPad in their lineup that you can actually, you actually don't just hold the power button down to actually turn it off. You actually hold the power button down with one of the volume keys at the top. I can't remember which one it is. Was it the down one or the up one? But you hold a combination of both, and then you can slide to power down, which I thought was honestly kind of strange because other iPad, you just hold the power button down and then you power it off that way, which is kind of weird. And then another thing, which is iPad Pro specific, not found on any other iPads, which is just a little nice thing, is you can actually double tap to wake the screen. So instead of touching the power button to wake it up, if you, like I said, double tap the screen with your finger, it'll automatically turn on the lock screen, which was kind of convenient. It's kind of like some of the newer iPhones. If you have a newer iPhone, of course, you can do the whole double tap to wake, which is kind of pretty awesome. Is it a game changer? I wouldn't say it's a game changer necessarily, but in some situations it could be actually faster than pressing the button on the side of the iPad. One thing I did really like about the iPad Pro is the fact that it did have a Pro Motion display, and coming from a tech enthusiast, I never used any type of display that has a fast refresh rate on the actual screen, and this is my first product in my whole entire life that I used and checked out that did have a fast refresh rate on the screen. That's pretty much what Pro Motion means. It means that you are getting a faster refresh rate screen. What does that mean for the user using the iPad Pro? Well, that actually translates into a better experience for you, because that means anytime you're using the device, you will be getting much more smoother experience. So you shouldn't see any frame drops in the UI. You shouldn't see any frame drops when you're web browsing. Pretty much anytime you're using the tablet, you shouldn't see any frame drops because everything should be buttery smooth. And in my experience, everything was super smooth on the iPad Pro, and that's probably the biggest feature of the iPad Pro, and that's one of the biggest reasons why you would buy the iPad Pro over other devices on the market, or of course even other iPads. I really do think Pro Motion can be a game changer, and the nice thing about Pro Motion is Apple has it to where the frame rates actually vary. So for instance, if you're just browsing through your applications, browsing the internet, pretty much anytime you're doing something, the frame rate will ramp up to 120 hertz. But then when you're doing something that is static, like watching a movie or maybe just looking at a picture or an image, it will go back down to 60 frames per second to, of course, save battery. And honestly, I think that is a good utilization of the Pro Motion display. I'm glad it's not running at 120 hertz all the time, because, of course, that would drain a lot of battery. So I am very glad that it doesn't actually allow that. Now, will everybody notice the 120 hertz display? I think for a lot of people out there, they may not even notice the 120 hertz display, to be honest, just because you would have to be used to it. Or if you're not really a tech enthusiast and know it's there, you may not even notice the higher refresh rate on the screen. Me personally, I could notice it definitely when I go back to other devices that do have a 60 hertz display, so it is nice. Even if you can't notice the difference between a 60 hertz display versus a 120 hertz display on a tech product, what I can say is I really do think that for the long-term use of the iPad Pro, if you're going to be keeping it for like 3, 4, 5 months, as time goes on, as you get more updates with these things, as it ages, of course, I really do feel like the 120 hertz display is going to keep this lasting longer than with another device that only rocks a 60 hertz display. So basically, your device should last longer, and it should feel faster over time, just because you do have that 120 hertz display. And then other things I like about this, obviously, are the fact that it does have a modern display. It has smaller bezels than some other iPads out there. I just love the way it's pretty much just all glass. I love the quad speakers on here, of course. This does have 4 speakers, and the speaker quality on the iPad Pro is flat out fantastic. I've really had no problems with it. It's so good, you really don't even need any external like Bluetooth speaker or headphones connected to this. Speaking on the topic of the iPad Pro and headphones, I'm not really a big fan of how this doesn't have a headphone jack. The reason I'm not really a big fan of how it doesn't have a headphone jack is because it is the Pro iPad after all. And why is it that the cheaper iPads you do get less for your money with the cheaper iPads, but for the exception of the headphone jack, you do get a headphone jack with other iPads that are priced much more cheaper than this one, which this one is supposed to be, of course, the best tablet or the best iPad to buy, but it doesn't have a headphone jack. I would have been okay if this didn't have a headphone jack and the other iPads didn't have a headphone jack, but for this to have more features and not actually implement a headphone jack is kind of disappointing, but it's not a deal breaker because obviously, of course, you can plug in a dongle or get Bluetooth headphones if you really wanted to get Bluetooth headphones with this device. Another thing with this iPad Pro especially, or the iPads in general, if you're thinking about multimedia consumption, they are really good for multimedia consumption, but more specifically, if you're thinking about getting one of these for a lot of video consumption, it's not the best for video consumption just due to the fact that when you watch videos on this thing, you do get 2 big black bars on the top and bottom of your display when you watch videos because Apple always makes their iPads the wrong aspect ratio for video watching. I just wanted to touch on that a little bit because I really don't think a lot of people touch on that, and that is the case with the iPad. So you may be wondering why you would get black bars because, again, it is the wrong aspect ratio. Apple went with like a 4:3 aspect ratio compared to a traditional 16:9 aspect ratio. Even though that isn't good for like video watching, for instance, it is good for general web browsing and using applications because that does mean overall you do get a bigger and better screen that way when it comes to the aspect ratio. So that's why Apple did that. But I did want to touch on that, even though it is a 12.9-inch display, you are going to be getting slightly smaller when it comes to video watching as a whole. Another thing they really did with this iPad, which some people don't talk about, is the fact that this does have a studio quality mics. At least that's what Apple claims. So basically it has 3 I think it has 3 stereo mics on there, I want to say. And overall, the performance of the mics I did actually test out, and I thought they were pretty impressive for what they are. Are they going to blow away like a dedicated microphone? Of course, they're not going to blow away a dedicated microphone, but anytime you can get some slight improvements, I'm pretty happy with the slight improvements that Apple could actually do with the microphone performance, because some people may want to use the microphones. The one thing I'm not really a big fan of is the placement of the front-facing camera. The front-facing camera I really think is in a really bad place, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about the Magic Keyboard. Speaking on the front-facing camera, I want to talk a little bit about Face ID, since I never really used Face ID before. All my previous Apple devices have had some other form of protection. They've had Touch ID or no authentication at all, just a standard password. And honestly, I'm pretty happy with Face ID. I think Face ID works extremely well, but just note, in my experience, Face ID didn't work all the time. It depends on the lighting situation. It depends on where I was using the iPad. It just honestly depends where I was using the iPad to determine if the iPad's Face ID would work or not. But more times than not, it did work, but it wasn't flawless. Honestly, what I really hope Apple does in the near future with a lot of their devices that do support Face ID, I really do hope they support Touch ID as well. Maybe they can do what some other manufacturers do, like have the fingerprint sensor under the display, or maybe they can put it on the power button or on the back of the device. That's what I really do think Apple should do, because like I said again, in a lot of situations it just does not work. And I do know nowadays, especially when a lot of people have to wear masks, I heard sometimes Face ID just isn't flawless and isn't really that reliable when you need Face ID to be reliable and nice. One nice thing I wanted to touch on with this iPad is the fact that I really do think the display on here is actually a really nice display. Granted, the display on the iPad Pro or any iPads aren't actually OLED or AMOLED. They are rocking just standard LCD, but for what LCD can provide, you won't be disappointed with the display on the iPad Pro. It would be nice if they went with something like mini LED, OLED, or AMOLED on the iPad Pro, because you are spending a lot of money for this display, but it is what it is, and it's not a deal breaker. And Apple does make some of the best displays on the market when it actually comes to their technology. So I had no problems with the display. It got very bright. The colors were very good, very accurate. Overall, I really did love the display on this thing. And that pretty much wraps up everything I love about the iPad Pro, at least the iPad itself and things like that. Now, let's actually transfer over to the Magic Keyboard, because I do want to talk about the Magic Keyboard in this video. Of course, again, this video is all about the iPad Pro and the Magic Keyboard. I really want to go in depth as much as possible. So the next thing I want to talk about again is the Magic Keyboard, and let's talk about this. First off, I just wanted to say the Magic Keyboard is not a cheap product. The Magic Keyboard for the iPad Pro 11 or the 12.9-inch version is very expensive. I think it's around $300 for the 11-inch. I know for the 12.9-inch, it is $350 for sure, and that is very expensive. If you were to buy, let's say, the Magic Keyboard for the 12.9-inch, you would have actually spent more. You would have actually spent the same amount of money you could have bought the base iPad. So basically, you could have spent that money on a brand new iPad to have laying around, but instead you bought a Magic Keyboard, which honestly I think after using this product, it is a fantastic product, but it's just a little bit too expensive. Honestly, I don't like how they charge $350 for a product like this. This thing should have easily been priced around, let's say, $200, $150 at most. I just don't see it being $350 worth of quality and worth of materials. Honestly, I just think it's a little bit too expensive, but for what you're getting, I really do think you are getting a really good product out of the Magic Keyboard. If you do end up buying it, for whatever the case may be, you aren't going to be disappointed. I love this keyboard. Now, if you don't know, Apple does make two keyboards for the iPads. They make the Smart Folio keyboard, and then they make the Magic Keyboard, which, of course, the Smart Folio keyboard is going to be a cheaper alternative if you still want a keyboard, but that keyboard is not going to be better than the Magic Keyboard, and you would be losing out on one of the biggest features the Magic Keyboard has to offer. It does have to offer a trackpad, and I really do think if you're trying to turn your tablet into a traditional computer or a laptop replacement, I really do think you're going to have to splurge and just buy the Magic Keyboard, because that's what makes the iPad more closer to a traditional laptop experience than ever before. So there's that. And honestly, I would personally get the Magic Keyboard over the Folio. Sure, you're going to have to spend more money, but I think there is something to be said about the experience on the Magic Keyboard. The really nice thing about this is the fact that the keyboard on this thing is flat out amazing. Yes, it's pretty much the same keyboard you would get on a traditional like MacBook or a traditional computer. When you actually type on this, it feels absolutely amazing. It's also really nice that this thing does have a backlight to actually light the keys up on the actual keyboard if you use this like in scenarios where it's dark and things like that. I really do think that's a big game changer. The only thing that's bad about the Magic Keyboard is, one, it doesn't actually have any function keys like you would get on a MacBook, and the function keys allow you to do things like play and pause music, change the brightness of the screen, change the brightness or change the volume of your device, and that's something I kind of do miss coming from other devices that, like for instance MacBooks that do have a function row for function keys on the keyboard. Again, keep in mind this is only a Gen 1 product from Apple. This is the first time Apple did make a Magic Keyboard, so I'm assuming when they do make like an upgraded Magic Keyboard, they may actually think about putting somewhere on this row for function keys, which I do miss. Is it the end of the world? No, it's not the end of the world. You can just use your control center and change the brightness and change the volume and things like that. that, one thing that is very frustrating about this product is the fact that when you actually try to change the brightness of the keyboard, you can't actually do it on the keyboard itself. You do have to go in settings and then go find the keyboard settings and then change the brightness there, which I'm not really a big fan of. It's kind of a hassle and it's kind of inconvenient. But I guess on another note, it does have adjustable backlight for the keyboard. Like, it's automatic. So basically the ambient light sensor on the actual iPad will detect how bright it is around in your environment, and it'll adjust the backlight on your keyboard to your surroundings, which I find very convenient, I guess. But if you just want to turn it off, or it's not bright enough for your likings, you do have to go in settings, which is kind of inconvenient again. And I think it's kind of a bad design on Apple's, because it's not really intuitive. It's kind of clunky. It's kind of a waste of time if you have to do that, which is kind of inconvenient. The one thing also I'm not really a big fan of is I'm not really a big fan of the material that the Magic Keyboard actually uses. It's some kind of like silicone rubbery type material, and honestly it's not the best material, just due to the fact that it gets very junky very fast. When I initially did my review for the Magic Keyboard, I touched on it, and I touched on how it wasn't that bad and how mine was actually in pretty good shape. But after that video, owning it for about another week and a half before I had to return it, I really noticed that this thing really does get very nasty very fast, and there's really nothing you can do about it when you actually use this thing. I guess the only thing you could actually do would to be bring a cloth around, like a microfiber, and just wipe it down all the time, because it is going to get nasty very fast, whether it's fingerprints, whether it's like grease stains, whether it's like just a lot of junk getting on it, which is not good. Same thing actually with the keyboard, the more that I think about it, because I remember using the Magic Keyboard, and I remember seeing grease on the keyboard. I remember seeing stains on the keyboard. It just doesn't like fingerprints. It just doesn't like it. So overall, it just doesn't look good over time. And then another thing that's bad about the Magic Keyboard, the edges of the Magic Keyboard can start to fray over time, which is not good. It's hard to explain what I'm trying to say here, but I really do think the edges of the Magic Keyboard will start to fray over time, and I'm honestly just not really too big of a fan of that as well. I really think that is a bad thing over time. This thing can wear out fairly easy. A nice thing about the Magic Keyboard, which I didn't even touch on up to this point, is the fact that it does have an extra USB port on there, and that's something that's actually very convenient, because that means you can charge this thing and still use the USB-C port on the iPad Pro at the same time. If you need to connect like a external hard drive, maybe a microphone, whatever the case may be, it is nice to be able to charge and use something at the same time. The one thing I do have to be real with you is, for some reason, when I used the USB-C port on the Magic Keyboard and I tried to charge it with a third-party cable, it did not like the third-party cable, and it would say on my notification, or my my battery indicator, it would say not charging, which is really inconvenient. And also I heard not just you can't use third-party cables with specifically the USB-C port on the Magic Keyboard, you cannot also use like slow chargers. You do have to use the brick that comes with your iPad Pro, the one that comes in the box. You can't use anything else with it. It just does not like third-party chargers, third-party cables, or anything like that. Just something to take a notice, because I was like, is my iPad actually broken, or is the Magic Keyboard broken? No, that's really not the case. It's just due to the fact that, well, it only wants the fast charger and the cable that came with your iPad Pro. So that's something to think about as well. If you're trying to use this and maybe you lost the cables that come with it, or you use something else, you're pretty much out of luck. Another thing about this that's actually I guess really nice, which I didn't talk about, is I love the fact that this thing is very convenient to actually use when it comes to your iPad. Like, for instance, when you open this thing up, it does have a couple of different angles you can actually adjust the Magic Keyboard, and you can pretty much dial in the perfect viewing angle if you want this thing. And the nice thing about this is the way to install your iPad Pro is pretty much magic. Basically how this works is it uses magnets on the Pro and magnets on the the keyboard to actually attach it, and once you just move your iPad close to the actual Magic Keyboard, it'll automatically magnetically attach, and it's so easy and so simple. Even a person that's not tech savvy could even figure this thing out, and that's something I absolutely love about this whole setup. One bad thing about the Magic Keyboard, again, going back to things that are a big flaw, this thing really does have one big flaw, and the biggest flaw with this keyboard over any other thing else is the fact that you cannot use this as a traditional tablet. If you want to use this as a traditional tablet, meaning you can't keep this thing on as you're actually using the iPad Pro. If you wanted to use it like in your hand, for instance, you can't use the iPad Pro in your hand. If you want to do something like that, you do have to get the Smart Folio keyboard, because that one will totally fold back underneath the iPad, and then you can carry it around like a traditional tablet. But this one doesn't have that feature. But on the upside, even though you can't do that with this iPad, you can take it on and off the Magic Keyboard anytime you want, and that's something I love about this. It's the coolest two-in-one device that I've ever used in my life. It's so easy to go from the keyboard to tablet mode, go to tablet mode to keyboard mode. So if you don't need the keyboard, you can take it off and walk around with your iPad, and then you can snap it on. It's like literally 1 second, and it's so easy. That's kind of why they made the iPad Pro kind of like floated. They kind of made it like in a floating scenario, or they kind of made it tilted up so you can reach your hands behind the iPad when it's on the Magic Keyboard and just detach it, reattach it, detach it, reattach it. And that's something I absolutely love with this keyboard. Again, that's the coolest part with this keyboard, and that's something that's so addicting to me, and it's just so awesome. So awesome. And the nice thing about this keyboard also is when you attach it, detach it, it automatically detects the keyboard and the actual trackpad. You don't have to go into settings every time, so you can reattach it, deattach it whenever you want, and you can go into any mode you want. Do you want to use it as a traditional tablet? Do you want to use it as a more of a like a laptop-esque replacement? Do you need to do those typing scenarios? And that's something I really do love. Now let's talk about the experience with the trackpad. Since iPadOS or iPads never had trackpad support or cursor support ever since ever, and this is the first time we've got full-on cursor support in iPads. And let me start off by honestly saying I'm pretty happy with the trackpad support on iOS or iPadOS. I think it's pretty good. It's not the same cursor you would get on like a Mac or a Windows computer, of course. You are going to be getting a little bit different experience when it actually comes to the trackpad. You get like a little circle on the screen, and then you can drag that circle around the screen. And the nice thing about iPadOS recognizes anytime you latch on something that can be clicked on. So anytime you get close to like an application icon or something inside of an application that can be clicked on, it will highlight it and it will bring it up a little bit bigger so you can actually recognize it. And that's actually pretty nice. Now, what supports the trackpad? Most everything in iPadOS does support trackpad, whether it's the user interface, obviously, or whether it's even applications. Most applications in iPadOS are actually optimized to use the trackpad, so you don't have to go to the web browser and just use the web browser. You don't have to go to websites to just use the trackpad, and that's something I absolutely love. I love the fact that it's so easy to use the trackpad here. Everything pretty much utilizes the trackpad here. I love the feel and click of the trackpad. It really does feel like any other trackpad I used in my life. I guess the only gripe I have about this trackpad is the fact that this trackpad could be slightly bigger. They could make this keyboard a little bit bigger, but overall it's not that big a deal. The nice thing about the trackpad here is the fact that they took pretty much all the same gestures that you would use on the MacBook and translated them over to the Magic Keyboard. So if you use like a MacBook and you're used to using a MacBook, your brain is pretty much already used to the MacBook trackpad gestures, so you can go over to the trackpad and use all those gestures. Like for instance, you can swipe with 3 hands, you drag with 2 hands. When you're in web pages, it's just the same experience you would get on a MacBook, and that's something I really do like. You don't have to retrain your brain for anything weird. The nice thing also is with the keyboard itself, you do have a lot of commands with the keyboard itself as well. And honestly, when it comes to this product alone, for some reason, even more so than other laptops or computers I've used, What I can say is, for some reason, I find myself using a lot of commands in iPad OS and with the Magic Keyboard. When I had it, I loved everything about the commands in here, and a lot of the commands also are kind of similar to what you would get on a MacBook as well. So it's very nice that if you have multiple devices like a MacBook, or you use a MacBook, you don't have to retrain your brain again. And honestly, I really do think that's pretty game changing, and that's something I found myself using a lot. All the commands, all the gestures on the trackpad. I just love this keyboard, and honestly, I really do think it's worth it. Now let's actually talk about my final thoughts on this whole thing. Let's try to ask the question, can the iPad Pro replace a traditional laptop or a traditional computer? Because Apple clearly keeps thinking, or clearly wants you to think, that the iPad Pro can be your next laptop replacement, or a traditional computer it can replace. And that's why I want to ask that as well, because a lot of people keep asking that question too. And honestly, right now, I think there is no wrong or right answer. It'll depend on the end user. I'm not really a fan of people who say, oh yeah, it definitely can't replace a traditional laptop or a traditional computer, because iPad OS is not as mature as like Mac OS or Windows. Honestly, I think it depends on what you do on the internet and what you do for your work. It just really does depend on what type of task you need to do, because in a lot of situations and a lot of scenarios, I really do think the iPad Pro could actually replace a traditional laptop for you easily. Sure, it doesn't have that same experience, and yes, it is true that the operating system is not as mature as, again, Mac OS or Windows, but it can do a lot of things that your traditional computer can already do. So for a lot of people, this could actually replace it. And then, of course, you do have the benefit of having a device that is a versatile device, especially if you got the Magic Keyboard plus the tablet. You can take it off, use it as a tablet, put it back on, and then you'll have a real laptop-esque experience there. And that's where I think it really does shine. One thing I will definitely have to say, though, to be honest, if you are thinking about using this as a laptop replacement, I do have to say that I really do think that you do need to buy the Magic Keyboard, without a doubt. Without the Magic Keyboard, it's less like a laptop, and it's going to be a little bit more clunkier for you. So you are definitely going to have to get that, unfortunately, even though it is expensive. You're going to have to eat the price, and that's something I'm not really a fan of when it comes to the iPad Pro and the Magic Keyboard. If you want the whole laptop-esque experience, it is going to cost over $1,000, and it is going to cost around $1,400, depending on which version you go with. Do you go with the 11-inch, or do you go with something like the 12.9-inch version? I just think that's very expensive for what it is. But yeah, you're definitely going to need both of these in conjunction to make this whole thing work. But yes, going back to what I said, I really do think this can replace a laptop or a computer for a lot of different people. It just depends on what you need to do on your device for your work. I know in some scenarios, of course, obviously you're going to need a laptop or a desktop computer depending on what your needs are. For me personally, could I get away with using something like an iPad Pro and the Magic Keyboard as a laptop replacement? Honestly, I can see myself actually using this as a laptop replacement. Could I do it full time? Honestly, I don't think for me personally, I can do it full time, just because there is things in iPad OS that aren't compatible with this setup. Some things I do on a regular basis that I would need a desktop for is definitely streaming. I do a lot of streaming, and I do a lot of video capture with a capture card, and that's something that's currently not supported in iPad OS, so it makes me still need a traditional laptop or a traditional desktop around for things like that, which is actually unfortunate. But for other things like video editing, photo editing, web browsing, documents, and things like that, definitely iPad OS could replace my laptop indefinitely. If I only didn't need to stream, or I only didn't need to use like OBS and things like that, then yeah, sure, I would definitely be able to use this. I would use this setup full time if I actually had it, of course. That would be something that I would personally like. But again, you will have to look at your use case to determine if the iPad Pro is right for you with the Magic Keyboard, and can it replace your laptop or not replace your laptop. Now let's actually talk about should you actually buy the iPad Pro 11, 12.9 inch and things like that. Honestly, as much as I praised this thing and as much as I said that this was my favorite Apple product of all time, yes, I love it. It's just magical. It's awesome. What I can say is I don't recommend this product, and let me explain why I do not recommend this product to pretty much anyone. The main reason I don't recommend this product to pretty much anyone is the price of this thing. If this thing was much more cheaper, then yes, I would recommend it, but I just cannot recommend it for a lot of people or most people. It's just way too expensive. First off, the 11-inch one I think is $800, and the 12.9-inch one is going to cost you $1,000, and that's not even taking in consideration taxes in your area, and it's also not taking in consideration if you want the pencil, if you want the Magic Keyboard, and things like that. It's just way too expensive. Sure, Apple claims this does have more power than a lot of PCs out there on the market, but keep in mind you are getting less for your money technically because you don't have a desktop class OS like Mac OS or Windows at your disposal. So there's something you have to take in consideration. And another thing is you do have to realize Apple does make a lot of different iPads. This is not the only iPad they make, the iPad Pro. They do make the iPad Air, the iPad 7th generation, even the iPad Mini. And those ones are much more cheaper than this one. And for a lot of people, when they actually buy this thing, they're not going to be doing anything that would be laptop-esque type. They would be doing things, for instance, like multimedia consumption on their device. And if you're going to be doing a lot of multimedia consumption on your device, that's where I really do think a cheaper iPad will come into hand. Even if you are doing some things, even like light video editing or even some kind of Photoshop, I even think even going down one notch to the iPad Air could even suit your needs for a lot of different use cases. You do have to remember all the iPads, no matter which iPad you get, all run the same operating system. They all run iPad OS, and it's not like the iPad Pro can do more stuff than the other iPads on the market. That's not the case. The only thing you would be getting with the iPad Pro, and definitely would be the better keyboard experience with the Magic Keyboard, which the iPad Pro is the only one that supports the Magic Keyboard. And then another thing you would be getting here are a whole bunch of equality of life improvements to your experience, but are not necessary. Like you would get a better design, you would get quad speakers, a USB Type-C port, that faster refresh rate screen. That's about it. But I think a lot of people could live with a lower iPad. And then you do have to realize as well is if you go to the if you spend $1,000 on this setup, or even the 11-inch version, you do have to realize that's laptop money we're talking about. So you can get a pretty good laptop at that price point, and you can even get a laptop that does some type of gaming at that price point as well if you wanted a gaming laptop. And that's just hard to justify this thing at the current price that it stands at. If these things were a little bit cheaper, then I would recommend them without a doubt. Honestly, I can still recommend this product to everybody, and if you do buy this, even if it is expensive, your money will be well invested because this product is absolutely amazing and you won't be disappointed. It's just hard to recommend, again, at that price point. One thing I do want to touch on, since I did forget to touch on it, since there's a lot that I talked about, and I never really said this either. None of my videos are actually scripted. I'm not really a scripted type of person. I really just like doing it from the head. So there is one thing I did forget to mention. One thing I wish Apple would do specifically with the Magic Keyboard, I wish they would give us a different experience when you actually snap on the Magic Keyboard. Let me explain what I'm talking about. Basically, if you ever used Samsung Tab ever since the Tab S6, I know as I'm recording this right now, the Tab S7 is pretty much already announced and is coming out or is already out on the market. One thing I really do wish Apple would have done was when you connect the Magic Keyboard, you would go into some kind of desktop class like interface where you can drag windows around. That's pretty much what you got on the S6 and the S7, because those you can go into Dex, which is pretty much a Windows-based operating system. Sure, it still runs on Android architecture, but just the fact that it is more suitable for a desktop class work area, especially when you have like a trackpad. That would have been amazing, because even though the trackpad support on iPad OS is actually amazing, you're still using the same interface you would use with your fingers, and honestly that's not the best experience. It would have been much more better if they had, again, a new user interface. It would detect when you're on the keyboard, and then when you pull it off of the keyboard, it would be nice to actually get that iPad OS touch gesture interface, because I don't wish Apple would remove that as well. That's something that's not really prevalent with something like the Microsoft Surface line. The Microsoft Surface line is good as a traditional laptop replacement, but then when you go to use it as a traditional tablet, when you pull off the keyboard, then that's where things start becoming clunky. It's kind of like these are both opposites. The Surface is good for a laptop, but not good for a tablet. But the iPad is good for a tablet, but not good for a laptop replacement, at least not the user interface. You can still get things done. It's not like you can't get things done, but it would have been a much more better experience if they had two separate modes, if you get what I'm saying, on the iPad Pro. And that's something I really do wish they would have with the Magic Keyboard. And maybe Apple will take cues from Samsung with the Tab S6 and the Tab S7 with the whole DeX experience, and put that on the iPad to make it one more step closer to replacing a traditional laptop, in my experience. And yeah, that's pretty much going to be the video there. I pretty much covered everything that I wanted to cover with the iPad Pro and the Magic Keyboard. Great experience, great product, worth the money. Kind of hard to say if it's worth the money, honestly, but overall, a great product. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne from My Tech News, signing out.